What happens when a country has to face scarcity? Not just once, but twice, in the span of a single generation. Today, we're going to dive into how Americans navigated two incredible crises, the Great Depression and World War II, and what their stories of survival, ingenuity, and even rule bending can teach us.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at these two crises side by side. Then we'll see how people made do during the Depression before we jump into the super strict ration book rules of World War II. After that, we'll explore how people worked around the system, how the government fought back with some pretty intense propaganda, and finally, what timeless lessons we can pull from all of this.
All right, let's start with the big picture. Both of these periods forced Americans to deal with some serious hardship and just do with less. But the kind of scarcity they faced? Totally different, because they were shaped by two very different national emergencies.
Think about it like this. During the Great Depression, scarcity came from a total economic collapse. People had no money, no jobs. The weird thing was, the goods were often there, but nobody could afford to buy them. Now, fast forward to World War II, and it's the complete opposite. People had jobs, factories were humming, but scarcity was caused by a massive wartime mobilization. All the essential stuff was being shipped off to the war effort, creating huge shortages back home.
So let's talk about the Great Depression first. This time wasn't just about suffering. It was also a period of unbelievable resourcefulness, where just getting by depended on a ton of creativity and relying on your neighbors.
To get through it, people, and especially women, kept their families going by basically substituting their own hard work for things they just couldn't buy anymore. We're talking about mending clothes until they were more patch than fabric, fixing shoes with pieces of cardboard, growing and canning every vegetable you could, and stretching every single scrap of food into a meal. And you know, some of that ingenuity was actually pretty delicious. When a simple treat like ice cream was a complete luxury, families got creative. There's this great story from a woman in Minnesota who remembered her family making snow cream out of clean snow, vanilla, sugar, and eggs. And in the summer, they just use hail and call it hail cream. Pretty clever, right?
But make no mistake, the hardship was very, very real. This quote from a young Polish woman in Indiana it's heartbreaking. It really shows how going without became so normal that the very idea of owning something new felt completely foreign.
In the face of all these challenges, relying on your community became an absolute lifeline. This was especially true in a lot of Black neighborhoods where people didn't just fend for themselves, they got organized. They created their own collectively owned grocery stores and food clubs so they could pool their money, get better prices, and make sure more people in the community had enough to eat. Okay, let's shift gears to World War II. Now, scarcity looked totally different. It wasn't about poverty. It was a national policy to conserve everything for the war. And to manage it all, the government stepped in with a very formal system, rationing. So rationing actually had two big jobs. The first, and most obvious, was to make sure the military had all the supplies it needed, everything from gasoline to metal. The second was to keep inflation in check. See, with factories making tanks instead of cars, there were fewer things for people to buy, but lots of people had money from war industry jobs. Rationing helped stop prices from going through the roof. In the list of rationed items, it was huge. It touched pretty much every single part of daily life. Every family got ration books filled with little stamps for things like meat, sugar, gasoline, tires, even shoes. To buy any of this stuff, you needed both the cash and the right ration stamp. Well, whenever you have a system that's strict, you can bet people are going to find ways to get around it. And that's exactly what happened. A massive, illegal shadow economy popped up almost overnight. And the scale of this black market was just staggering. The government's own Office of Price Administration figured that a whopping 17% of all the meat in the entire country was being sold illegally. We're not talking about a few shady deals here and there. This was a massive, nationwide operation. The press even came up with a fantastic name for it, meat legging. And that was totally intentional. They wanted to make you think of the bootlegging gangsters from the Prohibition era, painting these black market butchers as a new kind of criminal who was undermining the country for a quick buck.
So how did it work? Well, it was a whole spectrum of shady dealings. It ranged from big-time organized crime rings that forged and stole entire books of ration coupons, all the way down to a simple, under-the-counter deal between a friendly butcher and a regular customer. On a bigger scale, wholesalers took cash bribes, and ranchers would divert their cattle away from the official slaughterhouses to secret black market operations.
But this idea of an underground economy, it wasn't exactly new. Back during the Depression, when legal jobs were almost impossible to find, illegal operations, like the numbers game, which was basically an illegal lottery, became huge employers in cities like Chicago. They provided an income when the regular economy had nothing to offer.
So faced with this massive black market problem, the U.S. government knew it couldn't just arrest its way out of the problem. It launched an all-out propaganda war to convince people that sacrificing for the war was their patriotic duty. And the government's strategy was, well, it was not subtle. The posters didn't just ask you to maybe consider carpooling. Nope, they basically equated your personal choices directly with helping the enemy. This slogan literally turns the simple act of driving to work by yourself into a form of collaboration with Hitler. That is a powerful, guilt-inducing message. They also weren't afraid to appeal to pure emotion, especially fear. This poster uses the terrifying shadow of a swastika falling over these innocent little kids just to sell war bonds. The message is crystal clear. Your money is a shield protecting your own family from the horrors of the enemy.
And this is where the government really brought out the heady artillery. This poster flat out puts meat-leggers and people hoarding goods in the exact same category as spies and saboteurs. It framed breaking the rules not just as selfish or illegal, but as an act of treason that was directly helping the enemy win the war.
So after looking at these two huge generation-defining challenges, what can we take away from it all? Well, these stories actually offer some pretty timeless advice about how to be resilient.
The generation that lived through the Depression basically developed a survival guide. Be frugal. Take care of your relationships because your community is everything. Learn how to do things yourself, whether it's fixing something broken or cooking from scratch. And, most of all, live by that amazing motto. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. I mean, that's not just a historical note. That's a powerful recipe for self-reliance.
And all of this brings us to one final big question. From the mom making Hail Dream for her kids, to the neighbor starting a food co-op, to the guy paying a little extra for a black market steak, everybody was just trying to survive. But these stories force us to ask, in a time of crisis, where do you draw the line between just taking care of yourself and your family and your duty to the greater good?